The reclusive writer. The year was 1975, and on the windswept coast of Kent, England, Alice Lamb sat hunched over her typewriter, its rhythmic clacking punctuated by occasional frustrated sighs. Outside, her window, the sea crashed against the shore in a familiar cadence that had been the soundtrack to her solitary life for decades. Her cottage, a weathered stone structure perched on the edge of the cliffs, was cluttered with books, papers, and the accumulated artifacts of a lifetime devoted to academic pursuit. Alice's fingers hovered over the keys momentarily as she frowned at the page. The manuscript before her, an exploration of myths and folklore, had been the focus of her attention for months, yet the words refused to flow as they once had. Her weathered hands, bearing the marks of age and a lifetime of typing, made slight adjustments to the paper, erasing and retyping sections that displeased her. "Damnation," she muttered, ripping the page from the typewriter and crumpling it into a ball. She tossed it toward an already overflowing wastepaper basket where dozens of similar literary casualties lay. The sudden knock at her door was an unwelcome intrusion into her concentration. Alice ignored it at first, hoping whoever it was would take the hint and leave. When the knocking persisted, she rose from her chair with a groan of annoyance, her joints stiff from sitting too long in one position. She yanked open the door to find two school children standing on her doorstep, bright-eyed and expectant. They wore matching school uniforms, the girl clutching a collection tin that she rattled hopefully. "Good afternoon, Ma'am," the taller of the two children began. "We're collecting for the school charity fund. Would you like to make a donation?" Alice's expression hardened. "No, I would not," she said curtly. Without waiting for their response, she slammed the door, the sound echoing through her small cottage. Returning to her typewriter, Alice attempted to recapture her train of thought. Her reputation as a recluse had been solidified over decades, beginning in the 1940s when she had first published her academic theses on folklore and myths. The locals had long since labeled her as odd, eccentric, a woman who preferred the company of books to people. She glanced at the photographs pinned to her wall, visual documentation of the phenomenon known as Fata Morgana, a complex mirage that occurs in specific atmospheric conditions. Next to these were newspaper clippings and handwritten notes, the culmination of years of research. The following morning, Alice awoke to find her mail slot jammed with pieces of wood. Fury rising within her, she stormed outside, not bothering to change out of her nightgown or to tame her wild grey hair. The local children scattered as she emerged, their laughter floating back to her on the breeze. "Come back here, you little monsters," she shouted, but they were already gone, disappearing. Around the bend in the coastal road, Alice marched directly to the local school, her posture rigid with indignation. Parents and children alike gave her a wide berth as she strode through the schoolyard, making a beeline for the headmaster's office. Mr. Sullivan, a mild-mannered man with thinning hair and kind eyes, looked up in surprise as Alice burst into his office without knocking. "Miss Lamb," he began diplomatically, rising from his chair, "what brings you here this morning?" "Those children of yours," Alice fumed, "have taken to vandalizing my property. This morning it was my mail slot. Last week someone threw eggs at my windows. I demand that you put a stop to it." Mr. Sullivan nodded apologetically. "I'm very sorry to hear that, Miss Lamb. I assure you I'll speak to all the classes today." "See that you do," Alice replied curtly, turning to leave. As she exited the school building, Alice noticed the curious stares of the townspeople going about their morning routines. She was accustomed to the whispers, the sidelong glances, the way mothers pulled their children closer as she passed. In the small coastal town, her solitary lifestyle and academic focus had spawned numerous rumors that she was a witch, that she worked for the Nazis during the war, that she was mad. On her way home, Alice stopped at the local store to replenish her meager supplies. The shopkeeper, Mr. Hastings, watched her warily as she selected items from the shelves. "Morning, Miss Lamb," he offered tentatively. Alice merely nodded in response, placing her items on the counter. As Mr. Hastings tallied her purchases, she noticed a small boy standing by the sweet counter, gazing longingly at the chocolate bars displayed there. Something in his expression, a mixture of longing and resignation, struck a chord within her. Without fully understanding why, Alice added a chocolate bar to her purchases. As she left the store, she handed it wordlessly to the surprised child, who stared at her with wide eyes before stammering a thank you. It was a small gesture, one that she almost immediately regretted as she strode back to her cottage. Kindness invited connection, and connection inevitably led to disappointment. Alice had learned that lesson the hard way many years ago. Back at her cottage, Alice resumed her position at the typewriter, attempting to lose herself once more in the world of myths and legends that had been her sanctuary for so long. But her concentration was broken, her thoughts drifting to memories she had long tried to suppress. Scene 2. An unexpected visitor. The afternoon light slanted through Alice's cottage windows, casting long shadows across her cluttered desk. She had been working on her research paper for hours, her fingers flying over the typewriter keys as she documented the historical accounts of Fata Morgana mirages. The particular phenomenon had fascinated her for years, the way atmospheric conditions could create the illusion of castles floating in the sky, ships sailing through the air. There was something poetic about it, this natural magic that required no belief in the supernatural, only an understanding of physics and light. The knock at her door came just as she was reaching a crucial point in her argument. Alice paused, her hands hovering over the keys, hoping that whoever it was would go away. When the knocking persisted, she pushed back her chair with an exasperated sigh and made her way to the door. Opening it, she found herself face to face with a smartly dressed woman in her 40s, Mrs. Lawrence, as she would soon introduce herself, and a young boy of about 10 or 11, his expression a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The boy clutched a small suitcase and wore a label pinned to his coat, marking him as one of the evacuees from London. "Miss Lamb?" the woman inquired, her tone brisk and official. "I'm Mrs. Lawrence from the War Office. This is Frank. He'll be staying with you for the duration." Alice stared at them blankly. "There must be some mistake," she said firmly. "I haven't volunteered to house any evacuees." Mrs. Lawrence's smile tightened slightly. "According to our records, you did. We sent a letter last month outlining the arrangements." "I received no such letter," Alice protested, though even as she spoke, she remembered the mail slot that had been jammed with wood just that morning. How many letters had she missed due to the children's pranks? Perhaps it was lost in the post. Mrs. Lawrence suggested diplomatically, "Nevertheless, the arrangements have been made. Frank's mother works for the ministry in London. She's been reassigned and can't take Frank with her to the new post." Alice looked at the boy who was studying her with solemn eyes. He was thin, with dark hair that fell across his forehead, and there was something in his gaze that made her uncomfortable, an intelligence and perception beyond his years. "I'm afraid it's not possible," Alice insisted. "I live alone. I have work to do. I'm not equipped to care for a child." Mrs. Lawrence's expression hardened. "Miss Lamb, this is a war effort. We're all making sacrifices. Frank needs a safe place to stay, away from the bombings in London." Before Alice could protest further, Mrs. Lawrence reached into her briefcase and extracted an envelope. "Here's a copy of the letter we sent. You'll find all the details inside. There's also a small allowance to help with Frank's expenses." Alice reluctantly took the envelope, opening it to find a letter bearing her name and address. She had indeed been assigned as a billet for an evacuee child, though she had no recollection of volunteering for such a responsibility. "How long?" she asked, resignation creeping into her voice. "A week, possibly longer, depending on the situation in London," Mrs. Lawrence replied. "I'll check in on you both in a few days to see how you're getting on." Before Alice could formulate another objection, Mrs. Lawrence had bid them both goodbye and was striding back toward the village, leaving Frank standing on the doorstep with his suitcase. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Then, with obvious reluctance, Alice stepped aside to allow him entry. "You might as well come in," she said, her tone making it clear that this was a great imposition. Frank picked up his suitcase and stepped inside, his eyes widening as he took in the cluttered interior of the cottage. Books were stacked in precarious towers on every available surface. Papers covered the dining table, and maps and photographs were pinned to the walls. It was the home of someone who lived entirely in their own mind, with little consideration for physical comfort or appearances. "You can put your things in there," Alice said, gesturing toward a small room off the main living area. It was hardly more than a storage space, but it had a narrow bed that was mostly free of books and papers. Frank nodded silently and carried his suitcase into the room. Alice returned to her typewriter, determined to see